Uh-oh. It went dark. Hi, everybody. Good morning. You guys are very good and brave to be here so early. Last night I was at the speakers' dinner and they were asking me if I was nervous. I said, yeah, I'm a little nervous about it. And they said, oh, don't worry, it's at 9 o'clock. Nobody will be there. So you guys have surprised us all. So yeah, my talk is called Accessibility is a Big Umbrella. You'll find on your seats, or some of the seats are these little trading cards. I think trading cards are the thing this year. And you'll have 12 cards of all one kind. The idea is to trade with other people who are here, get a full set of 12, come by the nobility table and put your name in for a drawing for an Android once you get a full set. Actually, you can put your name in for the drawing anyway, and you can get a full set at the nobility table, but we just thought it was fun to have this game and to put the Braille stickers on it so that the people who are attending, as Brian said, there's a scholarship that was given by Google so that people with disabilities could actually attend. And so the blind people can play the game too, because we've got Braille on the trading cards. So take some time and talk to some of those folks and get your full set and come talk to us at Nobility. Okay, that's the end of my commercial. Accessibility is a Big Umbrella is the name of my talk. And hey, what's this? It doesn't want to go forward. Close it. Open it again, maybe? Sorry, we tested this. It doesn't matter when you test. You have to test again. Ah, there we go. So I am so honored to be here. I can't tell you. We've participated as Nobility. We've participated in this conference for several years. We have an information table, and I've done a few training sessions. As I told some other folks, you know, that's what I usually do. I train people. I tell them, how do you put the right alt text on an image? How do you make forms accessible? What do you do with way ARIA tags? That's the kind of speaking I usually do. So to be invited to do a keynote is really a great honor for me, and especially at a conference like this where I have always felt like people come to this conference to share and to share in open and genuine ways. It's always a really exciting time for us to be here. So I'm tremendously honored to be keynoting. And as far as my background, as Brian mentioned, I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit based in Austin called Nobility. I wrote a book in 2002 with Dr. John Slayton called Maximum Accessibility, and write technical articles mostly. I'd like to know a little bit about you guys and why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of these couple of days. If you wouldn't mind, how many of you think of yourselves primarily as designers? A few. What about usability specialists? Yeah. Programmers? Any programmers? Yeah, a few of those. Marketing people? A few. So how many think, oh, I do some of all of that? Ah, that's what I thought. Yeah, we all multitask. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here. We're going to talk a lot about accessibility. And you know, when I first told Brian the name of, he says, well, what are you now you're going to do a keynote. What are you going to talk about? And I said, well, you know, I better not use accessibility because people get scared about accessibility. So let's call it the big umbrella of inclusive design. But then as I got to work on it and I started thinking about what am I going to talk about, the fact is inclusive design is the important concept. But what I'm really going to be talking about today is how does that relate to disability and how do we include people with disabilities? And so I came back to that word accessible, and accessibility is the big umbrella. And what do we mean? You know, a lot of times people talk about accessibility in terms of, is our website ADA compliant? Does it meet WCAG 2 level AA? Is it 508? Does it meet 508? And those things are really important, and you have to have standards that you're measuring by. But ultimately, what are we talking about? We're saying that some system, a website, an application, a mobile device is accessible if people with disabilities have great experiences with it. Do they get the same information? Are they able to perform the same tasks with a reasonable amount of facility? Are they able to produce information? Can they write to the web as well as read from the web? Are they producers as well as consumers? So that's one of the underlying concepts that when I make that reference to accessibility, that's really what we're talking about. Great experiences for everyone, regardless of disability. And I wanted to talk about three things. These three things on the screen: the fact that the web itself, foundationally, one of the foundational tenets of the web and the creation of the web was that it was designed to be accessible. And last night, I left the gathering across the street last night when everyone had decided that every time the word design was mentioned, we were going to have a shot. And I thought, well, you know, if that carries over into the morning, we could have some fun this morning, but I don't think there's any bourbon in the room, so coffee will have to do. The web is designed to be accessible. Good design is accessible design. And then I wanted to share with you an experience I had that was really, it was an amazing experience for me, and it was helping participate in workshops for accessible voting systems. So those are the main things that I'm going to talk about today, and I'll start with this idea that the web foundationally, fundamentally, was designed to be accessible, and that's one of the basic tenets. When I was practicing talking, I thought, boy, at this point it would be good if I had like sound effects and I could sound like James Earl Jones, because when you look back on the history of the web, and Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues there at CERN, when they conceived of this notion of connectivity that would happen with the web, and this is where a dream was realized. The transcendence of limitations. I do a very poor James Earl Jones imitation, but really those ideas, the idea that we could transcend limitations through this new technology was, it was a really real possibility. And as it was implemented, it became an imperative, not just a possibility, but this is what the web is all about. It's about connecting people across barriers, whatever kind of barriers and however they arise. And I think, if we just took a minute, we can think of all kinds of things that cause differences and that cause disconnects, whether those are, many of them are listed here: platforms, operating systems, different browsers, having to design specific things for specific browsers, devices, data formats. Ability is just one in this list of barriers that might arise and that might occur, and that we have to think about as we design. How do we address these potential barriers? Physical distance, language. But when we do our job well as designers, then none of those things really should matter. And those distances and that distance should really become irrelevant. And we've seen that happen. I mean, I think one of the most transformational moments is when you realize that, you're talking about something to someone in another country, in another time zone, and you're able to share information immediately. It's really a great experience. As the web has become more commercial from that original vision of Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues, I think we can forget that foundational aspect, that the web is meant to connect people to each other across barriers. And if we think about the fact that it's really about people, not about technology, then we realize that we all use assistive technology to address those barriers. We all have to have some way to bridge the gaps of language or distance or culture or platforms or all of those things that I mentioned. So we're all heading into 2 really great days of sharing information. And as I said, I think this conference in particular is a really, it just has this spirit of sharing information openly and happily, and great learning goes on here. But I would like for, as you go into these 2 days of learning, think about that. How are we doing in fulfilling that basic potential of the web? Are we including everyone? If we aren't including everyone, who's being left out? And why are those people being left out? And how can we address that exclusion through good design? Because I think that is really a key element. So my second point was that good design is accessible design. And I so believe this. I mentioned the book I wrote with Dr. John Slayton. John passed away in 2009. But when I met him in the late 90s, he was an English professor at the University of Texas. And he had a great love of literature. His doctorate was in Marianne Moore, the poet Marianne Moore. Music, literature, art. He's not the kind of guy that you would expect would, a few years later, be the chair of the WCAG working group at the W3C. But John really, he was an early adopter of technology, and he had this vision of technology as a way for people to tell their own stories. So for him, it was a very literary medium. People now could tell their own stories without any interference. You didn't have to find a publisher. You didn't have to pass the creative writing classes at the Iowa workshop. You could tell your own story directly, and you could interact with other people's stories. It was from John that I first heard the word hypernarrative, and the idea that storytelling was going to become an interactive, communal kind of experience rather than just the author. And John, as the web became more graphically based and moved away from text, John found himself marginalized because he was blind. So early on, he became a very articulate and passionate advocate for accessibility because he knew that he didn't want to be left out, and millions like him didn't want to be left out of this tremendous potential for communicating and sharing experience and sharing stories. So every email that I ever got from John Slayton had this tagline: good design is accessible design. And so I think, it's really a good thing to remember and to see examples of. So when I was getting ready to talk, I told you guys I'm a trainer. And so as I'm going to talk to the big design people, I'm going to talk about design. And I started talking to some of the people I know about, well, what inspires you and what good design books. And several recommendations came. And the one that really got me was this book by Daniel Pink called A Whole New Mind. Has anybody read that? A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink? A few of you. Well, I highly recommend it. He talks about design. He talks about where we are in human evolution and the fact that we came from an agricultural age into an industrial age, into an information age, all of which are pretty left brain activities, and that now we've entered what he calls a conceptual age, where the right brain is going to have a lot more importance. The right brain, creativity, imagination. And he says the future belongs to creators, and this is the one that got me, empathizers. People who can understand other people, who can understand outside of their own experience. And in order to succeed then, according to Dan Pink's theory, and I don't agree with everything, but it was so interesting to read, and there are exercises in the book that help you kind of use your right brain a little more. To empathize outside your own experience is hard. Most of us design within at least some limits of our own experience, and nowhere is it more difficult than when it comes to disability, because disability scares us. We don't, we think that, oh, that could happen to me. It reminds us of mortality. We tend to really shy away from thinking about it too much, and it often startles and disturbs us. What's much more comfortable is to think about, oh, what's the user experience going to be for somebody who's pretty much like me, who shops online and maybe has a Twitter account and their Facebook account, and operates in ways that I can easily empathize with and understand. And so as we consider users, so if we make assumptions about them. So we have this guy, and what do we think we know about him? He's probably European, right? Because he's got those little dots over the O on his t-shirt. He's probably athletic. He's wearing those Nikes. He's probably, what else? Anybody have any other ideas about this guy? Who he might be, what he might like, what he might do? Anybody want to volunteer any thoughts about him? Well, what if we take a full body view and see that his legs are gone beneath the knee? What do we think now? Does that change? Do you have less understanding of him? Does it confuse you? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you wonder, wow, how does he balance on those things? that's I think, a really... And for those of you who can't see, we saw this guy's body from the waist up. He was blonde, handsome young man. And then when we get the full body shot, both of his legs are gone, and he's got these blades. Well, this guy's name is Oscar Pistorius, and he's also known as the Blade Runner. And he was actually disqualified from participating in the Olympics because they said, well, he has an advantage. He's got these prosthetic legs. He can't compete. So he's more than human. So the design of those prosthetic devices has changed the way. He's no longer disabled, is he? He's now sort of super abled or something else. And it kind of challenges our idea of how do we talk about disability, how do we think about it. Just not to have gender bias, I'll tell you also about Amy Mullins, who's, I think Amy's, she's probably in her 40s now, but when she was born, she was missing the short bone in the leg. I think it's called the fibula or the fibia or something. But those bones were missing in both of her legs. And her parents had a choice. They could allow her to go through life using a wheelchair, or they could amputate her legs and start with prosthetics right away. Well, that's what they did. They made that decision, and she started using prosthetics immediately. By the time she was in high school, she was a soccer player, a tennis player, a runner. She's gorgeous, as you can see. She became a model. She has, I don't know how many different sets of legs. Some of them are have high-heeled shoes at the bottom. Some of them are these beautifully carved cowboy boots that she puts on, and then of course she's got her athletic legs similar to the ones that Oscar Pistorius has. And the idea here is that when good design meets disability, it's transformational. And this is another book that was recommended to me that I read by a fellow named Graham Pullen. And the name of the book is Design Meets Disability. And it's really amazing. It's really interesting that he shows these examples of how good design, and Amy Mullen that's where I learned about Amy Mullen, was from his book, where that fact of designing those beautifully carved cowboy boots and putting Amy Mullen on the model runway in Paris transforms how we think about disability. That good design, when it's imposed on nearly any situation that you can imagine, can transform that experience. And another example he gave was eyeglasses. So he talks about historically how eyeglasses were a medical device. It was a medical device that you gave people. Nobody wanted to wear glasses. There were those poems, "Men don't make passes at girls who wear glasses," and that was, you became an egghead, or it was not glasses weren't really a good thing. But then good design is imposed. People start wearing designer eyeglasses, and suddenly people who don't need glasses at all get clear lenses so they can wear these cool glasses and look great. And so again, design transforms the way we think about something like low vision or the need for glasses. And this is true from something like that, a personal fashion statement, to something like the iPhone. And I think the iPhone right now is being adopted by blind users at enormous rates. People are blind users, and a few years ago, if you said, blind users are going to be able to use a touch screen, people would have thought you were imagining things, But what happened was a really interesting, I think, set of circumstances, because in 2005 and 2006, the iPod was being used on campuses through a program called iTunes U, where professors could put their lectures on an iPod and students could listen at their leisure, go back and listen to other parts. It was, it was pretty widely adopted. The university system at California State University system said, yeah, this is good, we'll endorse it. Teachers started using it. And then the iPod has none of these kind of interactive features. It was very, you had to be able to see to operate any of the controls. And the interfaces where you downloaded the lectures were all completely inaccessible. And so the blind students said, hey, wait a minute. We don't have equal access to the curriculum if we're using these iPods. So forget about it, California State University. We're going to bring a lawsuit for discrimination. So they, the university system kind of suspended the program for a while and said, well, okay, let's check this out. In the meantime, the lawsuit went forward. The California State Legislature then imposed legislative mandates on the university and said, you must ensure that any instructional materials are fully accessible and that then we get those, those mandates. It must meet Section 508, California Code, blah, 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 blah. So California State University meets with Apple and says, sorry, Apple, we can't buy your stuff anymore. We can't support your program anymore. It's over. Well, Apple could have done a few things. They could have gone to court. I mean, that's what Target did when they were sued by blind consumers. That's what AOL did. That's what JetBlue, Southwest Airlines, lots of people. They said, okay, we'll see you in court. Apple didn't do that. What Apple did is they took and gave this as a challenge to their very best designers. And they said, well, we need an interface that can be used by blind people so that we can sell our stuff to the California State University system. It's 23 or 26 campuses. And what happened then was this amazing iPhone, and I'm going to show you a little video of one of my favorite. Oh, come on, you just showed it. Oh, am I really not going to be able to show this? I thought I showed it earlier, didn't we? So what should I do? This is so fun. This guy's called he's called the Blind Film Critic, and he's hilarious.
Maybe too many people on the Wi-Fi.
Oh, is that? I'm on Wi-Fi? Darn. He demonstrates how he uses the, is there a way to plug in here? No? Okay, well, you guys have to promise me you'll go back and Watch the blind film critic use the iPhone, because it's amazing. He shows you, how he uses 3 fingers mean this, 1 finger means this, double tap means this, and then he uses the ability to speak, the Siri to dictate, and he shows you how he tweets out and gets messages, and we have one of the people who works for Nobility, her name is Desiree Sturdivant, and she's a blind musician. And she uses all kinds of music sites that are accessible. And when she got the iPhone, she was so happy because she said, I use the same iPhone that you use. I use it out of the box. It's accessible. And so my point here is that when good design is applied to a problem like this, that problem is transformed, not just solved, but it's transformed, and we have a better product as a result of that big, broad consideration. And so finally, my third thing was to share with you this experience that I had. As I've said, I don't know how many times now, I'm not really a designer, and yet I was invited to participate in this series of workshops at Georgia Tech, where they had to consider how to design an accessible voting system. Dan Pink's book, A Whole New Mind, which I mentioned earlier, it begins with the recap of the nightmare scenario of Florida during the 2000 election, and the fact that our election for the most powerful elected position in the entire world was decided based on bad design. That the bad design of those ballots caused more than 2 million votes to be discarded. And whatever you think of the Supreme Court decision or this or that or the other, the fact is that none of those problems would have occurred if the ballot had been better designed. And so what the Federal Election Commission did then is they started this whole initiative to help America vote. And one of those aspects was, do people with disabilities have equal access, especially as we introduce these touchscreen systems that weren't designed by Apple, and other kinds of electronic voting that cause certain barriers. Are the polling places themselves accessible to wheelchairs and to people with disabilities? So out of that consideration came what they called the Accessible Voting Technology Initiative. It was a 3-year program. It's being administered now by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and this I've got their website up there. It's elections.itif.org, and they started with a series of research studies to find out, so what are the barriers for people with disabilities? Why would they not be able to vote? And from those research studies, they convened these 2 workshops early this year. And then they combined the outcomes of those with an open IDEO process. I'll talk about that in a minute. And from the ideas that were generated through those workshops and online IDEO process, they are now funding ideas to actually improve the voting experience for people with disabilities. For me, this was an amazing example of good design thinking put into practice. What they did is each of these 2 workshops, they were held a month apart, each convened working groups. They invited 32 people to participate, and these were people, there were election officials and policymakers and academic research people and disability advocates. And there were many, many people with disabilities of all kinds who were involved as well. And most of the people had never met each other. So, you come to this workshop, you don't know anybody, you get put in groups, you're sitting around these round tables in a hotel and starting to talk about what are some of the problems. They assigned different voter personas. And I listed some of them. I could quickly, for those of you who don't see the screen, we had a blind woman in her 30s who runs her own business. We had a retiree with multiple sclerosis who had memory and mobility issues. And they really fleshed out these personas for us because it was based on actual research that they had done in the preceding year. So, for example, what we knew about George was that he was slow and he really liked privacy and he liked to have those curtains drawn, those curtains that they don't have anymore. And he kind of missed that. We had Angela with quadriplegia from a spinal cord injury. She can't grip items. She can't point. Minjun has vision loss, including color blindness, so color-coded interfaces don't work for him at all. We have an example of someone, Charlie, with autism, Maria with cerebral palsy. Michael is a retiree with significant hearing loss. So when he goes in to vote and he's talking to the poll workers, often there's a disconnect and misunderstanding. I thought it was interesting that they added this one. It's as a disability consideration, this mom who had to hold her 1-year-old while she was trying to vote because there are things that can cause disabling conditions that have nothing to do with actual medical reasons. And then Tyler was the last one. He's a college student who was blind and also had mobility impairments. So we're asked to think about these users, and as I said, they had more detailed profiles that we were given, and then consider these different scenarios. So 32 people, we were in groups of 8, there were 4 groups, and each of us was assigned one of these 4 things to think about. We're either going to think about what might be barriers for pre-election information, what might be barriers for in-person voting. So if I come into the polling place in a wheelchair, or I can't operate controls, what might be the barriers? What about remote voting? If I decide I'm going to get my ballot in advance, what might be some barriers that I would have there? And then the very question of ballot design that started the whole thing, how are ballots best designed to meet the needs of this broad spectrum of people? I think one of the most useful things that Georgia Tech did when they convened these groups is that each group was assigned a couple of graduate students in industrial design. And so they would scribe. And as we sat there, with, well, this is my idea, and well, what about this? I think that. These students were there just drawing out processes and flow charts and, making this all very visual. Those ideas then would start getting posted up on the wall, and they would inspire more ideas. As I said, there were people with disabilities who were part of these groups, and so what would happen is that you'd realize, oh, we're all talking at the same time, and we have a deaf person in our group, and the interpreter can't interpret everything all at once, and so we would have to be mindful of that, slow down, think about our process, or we're drawing all these flow charts and putting them on the wall. Our blind colleague here can't see that, isn't able to follow the graphic process that we've just talked about and described. And so someone would start to describe, oh, Jim, here's how that's going, and here's what this looks like, and do kind of audio description of what was going on in the process. And then that fact itself would kind of change the way it was like, oh, as you talk about it and describe it, it sparks more ideas, and it changed the way that we developed those concepts. So after, this brainstorming part, we realized, well, there's 3 other groups out there that are doing this same work this morning, and we got to kind of stroll around and look at everybody else's walls of ideas. And then we voted on, from an outside perspective, what do I think about? Maybe I'm working on remote voting. What do I think about the ideas that they've come up with for in-person voting? And we got to vote with our little sticky notes. And then at that point, if there was another topic that was interesting to you, you would go join that group. So we kind of reshuffled the groups a little bit. And and refine the concepts. So our design students then take all these ideas, all this chaos of, sticky notes and ideas and voting, and they, based on those priorities and the input from the group, we had refined the concepts that were coming out of the process, and then it was made into like these really formal poster kind of things, and we got to present as groups to the full group. Here's what we've come up with. Here are the ways we've identified the problems. Here are what we think are the highest priorities, and here are some ideas about how these problems could be solved or how these issues could be addressed. And Kelsey Ruger, who you see here, he was in the second workshop. I was in the first. Kelsey's on my board of directors, and some of you may know him. He's a designer based in Houston. He's really a fine designer and a good thinker about user experience. And Kelsey said when he came back from that workshop, he talked about how inspiring it was to be part of that, because it reminded him of why he does this work, of why it's exciting. And he said it really reinvigorated his practice in an illuminating way. And I think that when we solve problems, when we take on these challenges and solve problems in that way as designers, it is, it brings meaning to lives in the same way that Dan Pink talked about it. So the final concepts that we came up with were posted on this website, elections.itf.org, and then you just follow it through projects and design workshops. But, it could have just ended there, right? Okay, we did our work, there's the workshops, here's what we came up with, here's those ideas, somebody take them and do something with them. But instead, what happened is Whitney Quisenberry was part of the group that put all this together, and she had an idea to work with OpenIDEO. How many of you know about OpenIDEO? So a few of you. IDEO, I guess, when Whitney talked about them, she said they're designers, and they design things that you use every day and you don't even know who they are. And her example was, she said, there's a bump on your toothbrush that keeps you from holding it in the wrong way. That bump on your toothbrush was invented by the IDEO people. And so they have started this online ability to take on design challenges and then crowdsource them, get people to participate. And they have a number of different challenges. And so Whitney worked with them to take on this challenge of how we might design an accessible voting system, and to post it as one of their challenges. But the problem was that their website was completely inaccessible for people with disabilities. And we had a number of people with disabilities that we wanted to hear from in this process. So Whitney worked with them for months in advance and got them to a point where at least it was minimally accessible. You could get to the controls, you could operate it. It was maybe not a great experience for a person with a disability, but at least it could be done. So once that was done, we posted the Accessible Voting System Challenge, and nearly 800 people responded with concepts and ideas, and built off some of the work that had been done in those workshops and introduced entirely new ideas. It was really exciting to see that happen as well. And then some of the ideas that came out of the workshops were seen, well, this is just a small idea. It doesn't need a whole lot of money. I don't need a $100,000 grant to make this a reality. Why don't I just post this to Kickstarter? So one of the projects, which was to build a voter a field guide for poll workers to understand voter intent. That was posted as a Kickstarter program with a goal of raising $15,000. It raised $20,000, and so that project is now in the process of being built out. In sum, as I said, I'm really honored to be here. I'm honored to be talking to all of you, because it's so clear to me that great design solves problems for not just people with disabilities, but for all of us, which, I mean, we all occur somewhere on that spectrum of ability and disability. And I wanted to demonstrate, because last night at the end, Jay told me there was going to be a film festival, and so I thought, well, I'll find a little film to end with. And I wondered, do you think it'll work now? No, it won't work now. Well, this is a great example, because what Google has done is design a car, and you see this little short 2-minute film of this guy with his white cane coming out and getting in the car and driving and getting a taco and driving his friends around. So it's a blind guy driving a car is my last film here that I don't know how you would find it on Google, but I was hoping that I could end with this, because great designers, what's Google doing designing a car that a blind person can drive? What does that have to do with their business? I don't know, but it's a great idea. And when you hear him, the narrator of the film, talk about it, he says, look at what this does for me. Look at how I have greater independence, more freedom, and it just lifts his spirits and improves his whole quality of life. And that was one of those things that Dan Pink had said. And I hope that as you go through these next 2 days, you will have those transformational experiences. Like the workshop that I went to that just, made me aware of so many possibilities and helped me to think in ways that I hadn't considered before. And my expectation is that you will, because that's always happened to me before at this conference, and I'm sure that you're going to have those kinds of experiences too. So again, I thank you very much for getting up so early and coming and listening to all this, and I really appreciate the fact that you're interested in accessibility and good design for all, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, or comments, or yes.
How do you find the balance between using word deception and attack and by the way, at older technology versus the more progressive technology, like the HTML5 and that kind of thing? Like, where do you draw the line?
Well, I don't think you have to draw lines. I think it depends on what you're doing. It depends on your task. But HTML5 and CSS3, I mean, it's not like they're being developed in a void. They certainly are aware of accessibility issues. And in the meantime, there's another great design book called Designing with Progressive Enhancement. Designing with Progressive Enhancement, it's by a group out of Boston called the Filament Group. And they talk about building a good, solid HTML foundation of good standards-compliant HTML, and then you layer on your visual CSS, and then you create the behavior, but it's all based on good standards-compliant HTML. And that's the kind of question that I'm so much more comfortable talking about. Well, anybody else?
Is it on now? Oh, there we go. If you have a question, let me know. Raise your hand and I'll come give you the mic so we can hear the question. All right?
Hi, Sharon. Dana Chisnell.
Hey! Hey, that was your Kickstarter program.
It was my Kickstarter project. So my comment is, if you want to hear about doing Kickstarter projects, or you want to know more about the project that got funded, which is Field Guides to Ensuring Voter Intent, find me. I'm around. I'm happy to talk about that.
Well, hey, great to meet you.
All right, other questions? Yes, no? Raise your hand.
Are you going to talk about that during the conference? Oh, great. When?
3 o'clock
Today. Great.
3 o'clock today for everybody who didn't hear that.
Thank you. Good morning, Sharon.
Hi, Cone.
How are you?
Oh, good.
I just wanted to tell a little story about how I met Sharon when I first started doing web development. And she did an AIR rally. And what's that stand for again? Help me.
Accessibility Internet Rally.
And what we did is we were put together in teams and we designed websites specifically to make them accessible, and we did it in a couple of days. It wasn't even a whole weekend.
And you did it for nonprofit organizations.
We did it for nonprofit organizations. And that was the first time that I realized that I had been designing for myself and not for, as you said, the big umbrella. So I just wanted to mention that, and we should have an air here. in
We
Dallas.
should. That would be great. Yeah, and it's. I'm glad you brought that up, Cone, because our experience is that when you come at accessibility from the point of view of this is the mandate, you must do this and you must do that. Nobody wants to create under those conditions. But when you challenge designers, like Apple did, okay, designers, here's your challenge, and that's what the AIR program does. It says, we're going to have a contest, and whoever makes the coolest site most accessible gets a trophy. And so when it's a design challenge rather than a mandate, I think it just changes the way you feel about your work. I mean, that's just human. Thanks for bringing that up.
Fortunately, that's about the time we have for today's, but please give her a round of applause. She did a great job.